Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today I'm bringing you a standard deck. So the deck for today is Esper Control, and it is for the Theros season of Standard. So the first thing that you guys are going to notice about this deck is that it's laid out a little bit differently than what you guys are probably used to. Rather than having like layouts and graphics, this is a little bit more bare bones, where we have the sideboard, we have the main board here as well, so you guys can get a better view of what we're playing in the entire 75 in the deck, so you can make reference to like where we split things up with like a 3-in-1 split between cards like Hero's Downfall and Supreme Verdict as well. So it makes things a little bit easier to understand whenever you're looking at the entire list, rather than having to like bounce back and forth between the main board and the sideboard and make references and things. Another thing that I want to mention is that the entire deck list is down below that you guys can use as a reference, and you can also check out this deck list on TappedOut.net. I'm going to have a link to the deck on there as well, so you guys can scroll over the name of each card if you're not familiar with something while I'm talking about it, and you can kind of familiarize yourself with any cards that you don't know what they do or you haven't seen before or anything like that. I also want to apologize for the informalness of this deck tech, because I am still missing things in this deck. So with cards like Sphinx's Revelation and the Shocklands, I have copies. I have a full playset of each of those cards, but I'm missing copies because they're in my cube, and I don't have the cube on me to get them out of there and put them into the deck, so that's where the placeholders come from that. And I'm also missing things from Theros because today is the 29th, which is a Sunday, and I'm not getting my boxes and my pre-ordered stuff until Thursday, which is the 3rd. So I'm still missing things like Hero's Downfall, even though I have like one in the main board, one in the sideboard. So I'm missing 2 copies of that. And I'm also missing Ashiok, which is where this Jace Bellerin is. It's supposed to be an Ashiok, but the reason why I have this as the proxy placeholder is just because they're both 3 mana, 3 loyalty planeswalkers, with their first ability being a +2. But this is Ashiok. Just think of this as Ashiok whenever you look at this in terms of the deck tech. So that being said, and having told you that the deck lists are down in the description below, let's jump on into this. So the first thing is the creatures of the deck. So we have 2 AEtherling, 2 Blood Baron, and 1 Obzedat. I first initially started out with 3 Obzedat, 2 AEtherling in this deck, but I quickly started adding in Blood Baron and taking out Obzedat, because Obzedat is fragile whenever it comes to removal, things like Hero's Downfall and Azorius Charm, and Blood Baron is really easily able to avoid stuff like that. The con to playing Blood Baron over Obzedat is that Blood Baron dies the Mizzium Mortars and Obzedat doesn't. But the difference between all of that is that decks that are playing Mizzium Mortars are not going to keep Mizzium Mortars going into Game 2 and Game 3 just because of Blood Baron. Pretty much like that's the wrong way to go about things, because they're going to be keeping Mizzium Mortars for those decks that have a lot of creatures that they really want to get rid of, smiters and stuff like that. Them keeping Mizzium Mortars just for 2 cards in our deck pretty much is the wrong way to go about things, so you really won't see Mizzium Mortars going into Game 2, Game 3. But aside from dying to Mizzium Mortars, Blood Baron is just really huge with that pro-white, pro-black, and lifelink. It gains us back a little bit more life than Obzedat can do in 1 turn, but Obzedat is still awesome. I still wanted to have him as a 1-of, because that ability to flicker himself, come in and come out and deal 2 damage to our opponent, and have them lose 2 life and us gain 2 life and siphon that life to us is really awesome. Also, having him swing for 5 whenever all of this flickering is going on is pretty sweet as well. The AEtherling is awesome because it is able to buff itself up and give itself unblockable, so we can just hit a huge amount of damage in 1 turn and have our opponent just get grinded out really quick with that unblockable. But the nice thing about it is that it's the most resilient creature in the format, with being able to blink itself out to any spot removal that our opponent has at an instant speed, and also board wipes as well, whether we're casting them or our opponent's casting them. So the AEtherling is going to be able to exile himself and bring himself back at the beginning of the next end step. So even if we swing in with him, then we exile him at the end of combat, or at the beginning of or during the second main phase or something like that. He's going to come back at the end of our turn, and we can use him as a blocker in the following turn. So that's another thing that you want to remember with playing with AEtherling. For the other spells that we have in the deck, we have a playset of Azorius Charm to either be able to cycle it and draw a card. We can bounce an attacking or blocking creature, which plays into the synergy with Ashiok, with being able to exile the top 3 cards of our opponent's library, and then we can put a creature card with converted mana cost X that was exiled by Ashiok with the second ability onto the battlefield under our control. So we kind of have that synergy between those 2 cards with being able to bounce things back. And Azorius Charm can also grant lifelink to our creature, so if it means swinging in with AEtherling for a huge amount of damage, unblockable, and giving it lifelink to gain back a huge amount of life, that's something that we can do. We can also do with Obzedat if it means gaining back 5 life and we need that 5 life. So there's ways to go about having the lifelink. We have a playset of Far and Away. So Far and Away is probably the best thing about going to Esper as opposed to blue-white. We can bounce a creature with Far, and we can force our opponent to sack a creature with Away for 3 mana. 5 mana total, we bounce a creature and we force our opponent to sack, which will put them at a disadvantage. We have 3 Detention Sphere, which will exile a non-land permanent, not named Detention Sphere, so we can get rid of stuff like creatures, planeswalkers, even if it comes to our opponent having a huge amount of Advent of the Worm tokens or something like that. We can go and exile all of them. Detention Sphere is going to exile all copies with that same name that are being exiled at that time. So if we get rid of, I don't know, if it comes down to getting rid of one of our opponent's Ash Zealots, and they have 2 more Ash Zealots, it gets rid of all of them. We have 3 Heroes Downfalls, so instant speed, 3 mana, destroys target creature or planeswalker. Good for pretty much anything. It's a little bit less amazing whenever it comes into quick pace aggro decks that are going to range from 1 to 3 converted mana cost, and that's the bulk of their deck. So they're going to be playing really, really aggressively. Those decks, pretty much all of their creatures are on the same level, and nothing's really going to stand out higher or above anything else. So the Hero's Downfall is better in creature mid-range decks. It's also good for planeswalkers that we can get rid of that our opponent has. We have a playset of Sphinx's Revelation where we gain X amount of life and draw X amount of cards. It's been played in blue-white since it came out. It's just a really good card, and it's a really good draw engine and a really good way to gain back a huge amount of life if it's necessary. We have 3 Read the Bones, so sorcery speed, 3 cost, scry 3, draw 2 cards, and we lose 2 life. So we do have to lose life off of this card, but that's totally okay because we get the scry 2, and we can decide whether we want the cards that we're about to draw, and then we can draw the 2 cards. So ultimately it gives us a little bit of card advantage. It draws and accelerates us along in terms of what we have in our hands. We have 3 Supreme Verdict, which will destroy all creatures. It can't be countered, which may or may not be relevant. Sometimes if you're playing up against mid-range decks that are running creatures and counter spells, being able to have a wrath effect for their creatures that can't be countered may be relevant. We have the 3 Ashiok, which Ashiok is awesome with the +2 ability where it can exile the top 3 cards of our opponent's library, so it's effectively like Nephalia Drownyard. The -X is going to allow us to take back creatures that have X converted mana cost, or 1 creature that has X converted mana cost, put it onto the battlefield under our control if it was exiled with that Ashiok that is on the battlefield. One thing that you want to remember with Ashiok is that if you exile any amount of cards with Ashiok and then your opponent plays Dreadbore and then you play another Ashiok, the new Ashiok is not going to be able to interact with the cards that were exiled by the previous Ashiok. Just something to remember. But Ashiok being able to mill out the top cards of our opponent's library, exile them, and then we can play creatures from our opponent's exile pile is pretty awesome, especially when it comes to playing big things and big threats. We have 3 Jace Architect of Thought. So Architect of Thought is nice for being able to protect us from creatures that are going to be swinging in. So smaller creatures are probably a little bit more effective with kind of buffering out what they're doing in terms of damage if our opponent has a lot of 1/1s off of Young Pyromancer or something like that. Jace Architect of Thought is going to be able to dwarf the size of creatures if they attack with that +1. The -2 is a mini Fact or Fiction. It's going to only get in there for 3, where we reveal the top 3. we put them, our opponent separates them into 2 piles. We get to keep one, the other one goes to the bottom of our library, so we get more card advantage out of it, and we can ultimately just take something that we need in the given situation and be able to resolve it, potentially, either then or like the following turn resolve it, whether it's like a Wrath against creatures or something like that. So that's the main board in terms of like spells and creatures and whatnot. For our land base, I have a playset of each of the shocks, so a playset of Watery Grave, playset of Hallowed Fountain, playset of Godless Shrine. I have 3 of the Scry lands in the colors, so I have 3 Temple of Deceit, 3 Temple of Silence, and then I have, for the basics, 2 islands, 2 plains, and 3 swamps. So I initially started out with 4 and 4 for the temples, but then I started cutting them because I wanted to be a little bit quicker on things that I would be playing, so I started adding in more basics as opposed to the 2 copies that would be additional temples. But the Scry lands are awesome. Being able to scry off the top of your deck and decide whether you want that card for a following draw is pretty relevant, and it's pretty awesome. But the thing about them is when you start running more copies, it slows down your deck, so I wanted to run some more basics in here to not compromise the speed of the deck and being able to do things on the turn that we want them. So for our sideboard here, we have the 1 Dispel, 3 Negate, 2 Pithing Needle, 2 Blind Obedience, 2 Riot Control, 1 Glare of Heresy. We have 1 Hero's Downfall, 2 Thoughtseize, and 1 Supreme Verdict. So basically the way that it works is like for control-based decks, we're going to be looking to side in things like Thoughtseize, Negates, and Dispel. Dispel mainly whenever our opponent's running like counter spells, a lot of instant speed stuff where the Dispel is going to be relevant. The Thoughtseize is also going to be good for mid-range decks, like creature-based mid-range, or just any mid-range in general where they're playing like creatures and planeswalkers and like maybe counter spells or anything like that. But Thoughtseize is pretty much good for anything with like a higher curve where they're not trying to be like super aggressive against us. The Hero's Downfall is here to allow us to be able to deal with bigger creatures and planeswalkers on the turn that our opponent plays them after planeswalker priority has resolved, so we can effectively get rid of stuff that our opponent has like that. The Negates and the Dispel, like for control, it's better. Negate is also good up against decks that are running like a lot of non-creature spells to kind of go along with their creature spells as well, so we have the Negate to be able to deal with that, where our Wraths can get rid of their creatures, but we don't have a whole lot to deal with like any other stuff that they're using. So like if it comes down to being able to counter out Rakdos' return or cards like that, so the Negate ends up being relevant. Dispel is also good alongside Riot Control and Blind Obedience whenever it comes to playing against the weenie red decks. So the red decks that are going to have like that curve from 1 to 3, they're going to play like all efficient creatures within that certain section of that converted mana cost. And they're also going to be running things like a lot of burn spells and a lot of cards, or, well, not really a lot of cards, but they're going to be running Dynacharge as well. So Dispel can counter Dynacharge, it can counter any burn spells that our opponent directs at us, being able to get back things like Chandra's Phoenix. So I do also like to side into Dispel against that, but Riot Control and Blind Obedience are mainly here to be able to deal with really quick pace aggro decks. The Riot Control is nice in a pinch whenever we need to gain back life and also nullify any damage that's going to be dealt to us. And especially when our opponent goes and like plays Dynacharge and it's overloaded and they are just aiming to swing in with a huge amount of creatures and it may be lethal, Riot Control can just help us out there. Blind Obedience helps us out with any haste creatures that our opponents have, and it has them enter in tapped. We can also extort, we can gain life off of our spells that we're playing if we have access white or black mana that we can go and pay for that one extort trigger each time we play a spell. We can only use extort once, something to remember for you guys that aren't as familiar with the extort mechanic. The Glare of Heresy is here for being able to play up against like decks that are like blue-white. It's good just because Glare of Heresy is going to exile things like Elspeth. It's going to exile things like Detention Sphere as well. Heliod, if it comes up to dealing with Heliod, like white weenie decks to be able to get rid of their Spear or any other creatures that are like really good. In the white weenie decks, it's good up against like exiling a Johnny as well. But the Glare of Heresy, any deck that's running like a lot of white permanents or like multicolored permanents that are also white, the Glare ends up being good just to be able to exile that permanent. And I think the The only two cards that we haven't discussed so far are Pithing Needle and Supreme Verdict. So Supreme Verdict is up against like creature-based decks, anything that's creature-heavy, just destroy all creatures, so we have a playset total. And the Pithing Needle is mainly just for like planeswalkers that our opponents may have. So if they have like any big planeswalkers that they use to be able to win the game or to set themselves up for like a huge board state, we can play Pithing Needle, name that planeswalker, and our opponent's not going to be able to use it to gain any like huge amount of advantage. Like anything with good activated abilities, we can play the Pithing Needle for, and I'm sure that there are going to be more creatures that are going to get printed in the remaining sets of Theros that we can use the Pithing Needle for. But just for now, like planeswalkers are probably the biggest thing with Pithing Needle. For a kind of more narrow situation, if our opponent finds a way to get rid of our AEtherling to the point where we can't use either of ours, playing Pithing Needle on our opponent's AEtherling, if they're using one, is also a fair thing to consider doing in a game, if we do have the Pithing Needle sided in. So that's kind of something that we can go about doing, but Pithing Needle is mainly for the Planeswalkers. So that is Esper Control for the Theros Season of Standard. Like I mentioned before, the entire deck list is down below, including the TappedOut.net list, where you guys can check out all of the cards and what they do. And remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. Until next time, guys, peace out.